The first tip I have is forget the goal and focus on the habits. A quote that changed the way that I looked at goals was, "Every extremely successful person I know never expected to achieve as much as they have. Almost to a person. One day they woke up and they were stunned to see how far they had come. Why were they surprised by their success? They were busy doing. They focused on doing the work, day after day after day, to get them to where they hope to go. When you consistently do the right things, success is predictable. Success is inevitable." This is from the book The Motivation Myth, which is a must read for anyone who has ADHD. But the core idea behind this book and other books like it, like Atomic Habits and Compound Effect, is that to achieve goals, we never want to focus on the end goal itself, but rather the daily things that we're going to have to do in order to get there. This is especially true for people who have ADHD and who struggle with motivation. One of the hardest parts about having a long-term goal and sustaining motivation over time is that every single day when we're making progress towards the goal, it feels like we're never going to get there. For example, if we want to save up $10,000 and it's been 3 months and we've only saved up $2,000, we might be making progress as expected, but it feels demotivating when you've put in lots of work for 3 months straight and you are still nowhere near your goal. A great analogy for this comes from my favorite YouTuber, Dr. K, where he talks about how if we're climbing up a 10,000 step staircase, if we focus on getting to the top of it, it's going to be super demotivating because after something like 2,000 or 3,000 steps, we'll feel exhausted, we'll feel tired, we'll have put all this effort in, and we're still nowhere near the top. And this phenomena is tenfold with ADHD because we struggle with motivation. But when we take these kinds of goals, such as I want a job, I want a car, I want to write a novel, and convert them into daily habits, they become way more sustainable and way more easy to stick to because every single day becomes a success. If we go back to the 10,000 step staircase, instead of focusing on getting to the top, you're just focused on getting to the next step every single day. And when you're just focused on getting to the next step, you're not even worried about if you're at the top or not yet. You'll get there before you know it. Here's some examples on how we can convert goals into daily habits. Instead of thinking I want a job, shift your goal to I'm going to apply to 3 positions every day. I want a car becomes I want to save $20 a day. I want to write a novel becomes I want to write 500 words a day. This is super stimulating for the ADHD brain because we are accomplishing something every single day. And the little dopamine hit we get when we kind of check off our progress and we're like, nice, I did the thing I was supposed to do today. I'm accomplishing my goal, can be super rewarding. And when we get lost in the sauce of just doing the same thing every single day, we get to our goal before we even know it. This also helps make big long-term goals less daunting because the thing is, anytime something is complex or difficult, the ADHD brain kicks into overdrive into reasons as to why we should not do it. But when our goal is to just do a small little 10-minute task every day, of course we're going to be able to do that. And when we have these kind of smaller tasks, it becomes a lot easier to fit it into our oftentimes hectic schedules due to our difficulty with time management. There's some research we can also use to boost this tip further, which talks about how when people with ADHD set personal best goals and just compare their progress to their own previous progress, they tend to do a lot better. We can apply this here when you're just kind of focused on matching or slightly improving the performance that you had the day before, or you're just focused on hitting the goal that you set for yourself every single day. And this moves me into my next tip, which is we need to stop comparing ourselves to other people. ADHD brains, as that article on personal best mentions, tend to have a really hard time matching neurotypical people's performances and typically have to work 10 times as hard to fit in with a world that's built for neurotypical people. Not only that, but we tend to get compared to other people a lot more because of how different we are. Phrases like, oh, why can't you be like his son, or she's so much more put together, are commonplace for a lot of kids with ADHD to hear either from their parents, teachers, or supervisors. So how do we stop comparing? We want to focus on having a personal best mentality. We always want to compare our progress to how we were doing the day before, because if we compare ourselves to neurotypical people, we're going to get discouraged. Neurotypical people are going to get the hang of habits a lot quicker. They're not going to need as many special tips because all of the advice in the world that already exists for them is catered to the neurotypical brain. They have a much easier time finding sound advice that is built for them, and every single structure is set up for them. So of course they're going to be doing better. It's an unfair comparison. But when we compare against ourselves, the study found that people who are neurodivergent tend to do just as well as neurotypical people, if not better. This can help us find what works for us and not look at what other people do. And one of the biggest things with having this kind of personal best mentality is we need to make sure that we know whether or not something is a personal best or if we're matching our previous performance and improving over time. The way that we do this is through self-monitoring. There's another study that found that ADHD brains tend to do better when they're monitoring their own performance. So as soon as I heard this, my ADHD brain thought, I don't want to do that. That sounds like a lot of work to be tracking so many different things at once. Luckily, self-monitoring is super easy. The most ADHD-friendly system to self-monitoring is the chain system, developed by Jerry Seinfeld. It is remarkably simple. All you need is a calendar and a red marker. For any daily habit that you have, if you complete that habit, you put an X on the calendar. And what Jerry Seinfeld would say is that once he had put enough X's in a row on a calendar, he didn't want to break the chain. So that would kind of help give him motivation to do the task. And again, having this visual reference of how much you've completed and how well you're doing can serve to boost your motivation in the long term if you have ADHD. Any opportunity we can get to increase our motivation motion to increase our sense of progress is awesome. And this is one of the best visual, easy ways that you can see how long you've been doing something. Anytime you feel discouraged or you feel like giving up, you can look over and you can see 60 days in a row, and seeing that visual progress feels awesome. So you want to keep it going. But the thing is, sometimes we struggle to self-monitor. It's not an easy thing to do. So my next tip is to do things with friends if possible. Before we dive into this next tip, if you're liking the video, make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button if you want more tips like this, and comment down below any tips that you have. You might help someone else out in the comments below. A study on the Goal Management Training Program, which is a program designed to help people with ADHD function better, has a group component where people with ADHD get together with other people with ADHD on a regular basis in order to talk about the stuff they're going through. And it was found that this group element was very helpful for a lot of people with ADHD. I quote, "The group created a sense of a belonging. I am not alone." Having other people do your goals with you, especially if those other people have ADHD, can be really helpful because social pressure is really helpful for people with ADHD. As everyone with ADHD typically knows, we are all people pleasers. So that added pressure can be super helpful. It can also help us keep accountable when we have someone that we need to report to on a regular basis. And we can also bounce off ideas and tips off of the other person. We can ask them how they're going through certain challenges and certain obstacles. And it can also validate us and help us not feel as alone when someone else is going through the same struggles that we are. Having friends can help us through the good days, and it can help us through the low days, which is another thing we have to be mindful of. People with ADHD have lots of highs and lots of lows, and both of these can be dangerous, which brings me into my next tip. Have a range for your habits. I try and have a lower and an upper limit for my habits, and both are equally important. The upper limit helps us to not overexert and fall into ADHD burnout, and the lower limit helps us to not lose momentum when we have low days and keep us going through difficult times so that we build strong habits. An example of what this might look like is if I want to write a novel, my lower limit might be 500 words a day, and my upper limit might be 3,000 words a day. So I have to at least write 500 words if I want to cross off my kind of chain for the day. But once I reach 3,000 words, I'm not going over that point. Consistency is the biggest thing that we need to keep in mind if we're going to be achieving goals. And having this helps us, again, not underdo things and fall off the wagon, and not overdo things. Speaking of overdoing, a lot of us with ADHD have a tendency to overdo things, especially when we first get started. And that's one of the biggest traps we can fall into when it comes to long-term goals. So this brings me into my next tip, which is to start small. ADHD brains love big, huge, exciting changes. But the thing is, oftentimes small changes over time make a way bigger difference than we think they will. For example, if we compare reading 10 pages of a book per day versus reading 100 pages of a book per day, with 100 pages, we're likely going to be able to stick to that for maybe at most 3 weeks. And we will have read 2,100 pages. That seems like a lot, right? But if we just read 10 pages a day, we can likely stick to that for like 3 years. And if we do stick to it for 3 years, we'll be reading 10,950 pages. That is way more than the approach of doing things big and fast right in the beginning. We'll be reading over 40 books compared to the maybe 10 that we would get if we went with a way more ambitious approach. Don't underestimate the power of doing small changes over time, because there's a lot of hidden benefits that'll happen as well with the 10 pages a day example. We'll be picking up new information every single day, and it'll help us have more engaging conversations with other people. It might help us network a little bit better because we can join a book club for different books that we're reading. We might also start to develop better habits because at night, maybe when we're going to bed, we'll start doing reading instead of watching TV, which will help us get better sleep. And some days we'll probably go over the 10-page minimum, which means we'll end up reading even more books in the long term. These little benefits can start to have a huge impact over time. One of the biggest problems with doing something every single day is that ADHD brains need it to be as easy as possible, which brings me into my next point, which is make it easy. One of the biggest hurdles that ADHD brains run into is that we love to procrastinate, and we always overestimate how much we'll be able to do in the future compared to right now. We have to keep in mind our tendency to procrastinate anytime any kind of obstacle comes up. And to eliminate this, we need to remove any obstacles there are to performing our daily habit. For example, if we want to get better at guitar, always have your guitar as near you as possible at the time that you plan to do it. So for example, if I want to practice 10 minutes of a guitar before going to bed, I need to keep my guitar right by my bed. It needs to be plugged into my amp, and my amp needs to be ready to be turned on immediately. If you want to go for a run every morning, have your running shoes underneath your bed. Have your running gear ready to go. Have a glass of water by your nightstand. It should be as easy as possible, because any obstacle that pops up is going to stop us from completing the habit potentially. So make sure that you keep this in mind when you're trying to create habits. If it takes more than a minute for you to get started on your habit, you're doing it wrong. So that's all I have for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Next to my head, somewhere on the screen, I'm gonna pop up a video where you can learn even more tips just like this on how to focus better. Check it out if you're interested. And again, comment down below if you have any tips that you think might help. Thank you for watching, and take care.